Maybe the number one thing that we can look at is if our expectation of how long they're supposed to be sitting is realistic.
Yeah.
So usually we're looking in general for sitting tolerance, whether that's for homework, whether that's for eating. We're looking at about 2 to 5 minutes per age, per year of age. So let's say a 5-year-old, we would expect them to sit for 10 to 25 minutes.
All right.
And that's a 5-year-old who's neurotypical. If we're looking at a neurodivergent individual, we're looking at
Different.
less. Yeah.
In the end of the day, very, very correctly, you mentioned that, Effie. It's the parents that are dealing with kids, and it's all about getting them to change as well.
Yeah.
The kind of mentality, the way they're doing things, understand their kids a little bit better and differently from our perspective and what we give them. And if you put a child to try something by themselves, it's not really like fair on them, isn't it? But if the whole family comes and sit together and they start trying and say, this food has this texture, has this kind of like taste, it gets an 5 out of 10, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's helpful for kids.
What's important to think about in those moments is whether you want your kid to eat short term or whether you're trying to look at things more long term. Short term, sure, maybe you can hide a carrot in your tomato sauce and maybe they won't notice. Although if they're extremely picky, they probably will. And like you said, it'll impact your relationship with them because they might no longer trust you. And that might also raise their own anxiety every time they're going to have a meal.
Yeah. Hi and welcome to a new episode of Kids Diet Matters, the podcast. I'm Christina Basta, a specialist pediatric dietitian who has worked for a number of years in different NHS trusts in London. And you might be surprised to hear me speaking in English today, but I'm very, very happy because I have a special guest with me. So I would like to present you Effie, who is a pediatric occupational therapist and a parent coach, a.k.a. Uplifted Parenting. Effie, welcome to this podcast. I'm really, really happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Christina. It's nice to be here.
Thank you. It's been really, we've been discussing about this podcast a few days ago, and we were having a really nice chat about picky eating that we will be discussing today. And we're saying that would be a great podcast, so why not? So here we are. Thank you, Effie. Thank you for being here. So before we start, Effie, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself so we can get to know you better and then we can move on to our conversation?
Yes, for sure. So I am an occupational therapist. I was born in Greece, but was raised partially in America and Canada, and a little bit in Greece as well. I completed my studies in Canada, first my bachelor in psychology, and then my master's in occupational therapy.
That's great.
And I've been working as a pediatric occupational therapist for a few years now in the private sector. And a year ago, actually a little bit less than a year ago, I started an Instagram page where I talk about sensory processing, picky eating, and emotional regulation, and I've been really enjoying it.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing what you're doing, Effie, because I've been watching what you are uploading, and it's really, really helpful for parents, but also for healthcare professionals that we follow you, so we can see your kind of perspective. And it's definitely a good way of learning and enjoying food of what you're showing with kids. So this is what we will be discussing about today. So we'll be jumping to our subject. And we are both quite familiar with picky eating, and we've been working with these kids and their parents for a number of years. And we've seen that it's been on the rise in the past years, and it's something that is definitely giving a little bit of an extra stress to the parents, and they do struggle sometimes to identify and find out what is the cause of this picky eating. So sometimes it might be sensory difficulties, sometimes it might be behavioral, sometimes it might be a combination, especially if we have like different conditions like ADHD or autism. So I would like to discuss a little bit in this first question, how can we distinguish these two different aspects of picky eating in kids, and what can we do to help them a little bit better?
That's a great question. So eating in and of itself is a sensory experience because our taste is in play, our touch is in play, our seeing the food, smelling the food. So eating in and of itself is always going to be a sensory experience. I would say the big red flags to know whether it's more sensory related is if your child gags when they see a food, when they smell a food, when they taste a food. If you see real gagging, that to me is a red flag that it's more of a sensory difficulty.
Would you specify it in a specific age range, or would it be any type of?
So I'm not super familiar with with ages younger than 2 years old. So throughout this whole podcast, I'm kind of speaking more towards to the age group of 2 and older.
Toddlers and older kids. Yeah? Okay.
Exactly.
Fair enough.
So whenever we see that kind of gag reflex over and over with specific foods, with specific textures, so if we see a really strong preference to maybe either soft or crunchy textures, that's also telling me that it's more of a sensory difficulty as well. And then when we see things like sensitivities, tactile sensitivities, or when we see difficulties with toothbrushing in general,
yeah, definitely.
That to me is also a red flag and you have a picky eater, then that could be more sensory related rather than just maybe anxiety or oral motor or behavioral.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. That's great, Effie, and it's really interesting. And I've been doing food trials here as well in my practice, and I'm seeing all these different kids that are coming with selective eating, and there's so many different aspects that you have to unpick and see why in the end they are selective and they're limiting their food choices that much. And in the end of the day, when we are trying the foods, we're seeing that they're seeing this food and no, this is yucky, I'm not gonna try it, and they push it away, and then they see the carbs that are more comfortable with, and of course it's a safe food for them, and they're this is what I'm gonna eat. So definitely these crunchy carbs that we're seeing that kids love with selective eating, and the wet textures that we will be going through a little bit later in the conversation, it's not as much loved from kids. So yeah, that's great. Okay, Effie. So you would saying that, would it be the behavioral a little bit maybe easier to cope with compared to the sensory aspect of selective eating?
I don't think necessarily we can
say something
say
yes
that
or not.
It's exactly.
Yeah.
So we can't, whenever somebody comes to me and they have a picky eater and they tell me, oh, it's not sensory related, but it is, because eating is a sensory experience. So I'm never going to see it just as a behavioral problem. Even when they think it's not a sensory issue, there's always a sensory preference. So it might not necessarily be gagging, but we do usually see a preference for a certain type of food or a specific type of texture.
Yeah.
So we always want to work around that.
Definitely. I think this is the next question. So it's a really good link for that. Thank you, Effie. So it is all about the textures that we want to discuss after that. And if we dive into a little bit deeper, we see that I agree with you, food is an experience. And when we are describing it to kids, what do you need to eat? Okay, you need to look at the food, you need to smell the food, you need to taste it, see the texture, the taste, to grab it, to hold it in your hand if you want to try it like that. So we see that this is where the textures start to be a little bit more difficult for them, and they're putting them off, especially, as I said, if there is a background of a different type of disorder there. So what is with the wet textures, Effie? Why are they not really loved by kids, and we have all this hesitance for them to try them, to play with it, to get a bit more familiar with this food? What's going on? It would be really interesting to tell us a bit about it.
Yeah, that's a really great question, Christina. So basically what you're describing, when we see a kid who really doesn't want to touch a food, doesn't want different textures touching each other, is very, very not willing to play with food or touch a food or eat a food, that's what we call tactile sensitivity. So when a child is tactile sensitive, any kind of tactile input, and it can be clothing that's difficult, it can be light touch that's difficult, It can be touching different foods or even messy play, which we see is very common amongst kids. It's something that a lot of kids love to do. But as soon as we see a child who's tactile sensitive, they're like, absolutely no, we're not engaging in any of this. Get me away from all of this.
There's a bit of a distance there.
Yeah, and it's actually their nervous system is telling them that this is a threat. So it's not something that they're choosing to react this way. It's really their nervous system that's been wired in this way that makes it really, really difficult. And it's perceived as dangerous. So of course I don't want to, it makes me anxious, it makes me feel uncomfortable to engage in these types of play or to touch, to be touched. So I really, really don't want to do any of this. And we see that tactile sensitivity has been linked with picky eating because we have a lot of tactile receptors in our tongue, in our mouth. So of course, if you're tactile sensitive to touching things with your hands, you're also going to feel that way with things being in your mouth as well.
Wow. Okay, Effie. I'm really happy that we're having this conversation. As we're speaking, I'm understanding that I'm happy that you are here today. So I think it's so helpful for parents to know that, and for carers and for healthcare professionals, because, you know, sometimes, as you said, it might come across as a child that is being picky is difficult or is a little bit more like spoiled maybe, and they're, you know, it's all these behavioral aspects that we see that it comes in the end from like the childhood years, the baby years, like all these like kind of experiences they had with food. And in the end of the day, you see if there was pressure, if there was anything else, or if they stayed for like in the area of solids and they had it then blended and not given like baby-led weaning kind of approach, you see that there is a little bit of an anxiety there of like processing food and touching food and all these oral motor skills that we want for kids. So I think it's great because it makes sense. And you're saying that it's not that it's like, you know, that he doesn't want it, it's like he cannot.
Exactly.
So it's so important to flag it. So thank you so much for that. Yeah.
Kids aren't trying to manipulate you. They're not being stubborn just for the sake of being stubborn. It's really their nervous system that's exactly.
No.
Exactly. And there's a few things that we can do about it. So we can, first of all, accommodate. So if you see that they don't want to engage in messy play, don't force them. We can desensitize, and I'll speak to that a little bit, but in order to accommodate them, even when we're doing feeding therapy or when we're trying to get them to eat or play with new foods, always having the ability to wipe themselves with a washcloth that they have, that they can see, they can use it right away is a great idea. And using different tools, so using either a fork or these cute little toothpicks with little animals on them, just to make it fun and to make it less intimidating, because we do have a lot of tactile receptors on our hands as well. So it can feel very overwhelming to touch the food, but maybe they're okay with maybe smelling the food. So maybe they can use a toothpick to bring it close to their nose and smell it and get more comfortable with the other properties of the food while being accommodated in the tactile part.
You see me smiling because I've been a picky eater. So when I was young, I was really, really picky and they were chasing me to eat my food. So I did have this experiencing in mind, and it's very useful for now because I can really understand kids and, you know, the stress that they get. And you remind me now that we're doing the food trials, I'm trying with them as well. So it helps me in the sense of like all the sensory bit for some foods that I might not be eating, also for me to get familiar. So all this desensitization processing you are referring to is really, really helpful, and I think it's a great tool. But it's also like the kind of like concept you're doing it and the place you're doing it, because, you know, sometimes messy play can come across to parents a little bit like, okay, you know, house is going to be a little bit all over the place, and kid is going to be like all over food, and you see that they get a little bit more worried about that. But it's, in the end of the day, if you do it in the right way, it is very helpful for the kid if you do like multiple exposures.
Exactly. So for desensitization, we're looking at staying within their comfort level. We don't want to force them in any case, whether it's with foods or with unrelated messy play. So we're talking about sensory bins, we're talking about paint, shaving cream, anything that you can use that they can get messy. We're starting really, really, really slow, making sure that we're in their comfort zone. We don't want to go from, let's say they can't tolerate it at all, to expecting them to tolerate wet textures. So starting with maybe dry textures could be a good idea. Doing more sensory bins with dry sand maybe, or dry beans, and then moving on to more harder textures, which are the wet textures to play with. And doing this maybe every day if you can, for 5 minutes a day.
They're gonna hate us.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be...
No, it's right. It's right. I agree with you, but it's where you find the time and how this is like practical sometimes. So even like for parents to sit with the kids to eat, we see that this is a big thing, isn't it? And we know that this is very beneficial for like the behavior and everything. But great point, Effie. Great
just
point.
5 minutes. Just 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
And even within a month, you can see really it can translate to a lot of ease with foods. So yes, it's play, and what does this have to do with eating? But it can really translate. We can definitely see an improvement when we see an involvement in messy play.
And it's really helpful, Effie, in terms of like toothbrushing that you mentioned before, doing it in the bath time with bubbles and a little bit more like relaxing music and not like very bright lights.
Making it fun.
Because it's very sensory around the mouth area as well. So many kids that they don't want these textures, they are a bit off from the paste as well.
Toothpaste. Yes, 100%. Yeah, I love that you brought that up. Any way that we can make something that's difficult for them more playful.
Exactly.
And
they're
like
kids.
exactly. We're not going to achieve anything by forcing them. So might as well, instead of spending your time yelling and stressing and spend a little bit of time thinking about how I can make this experience a bit more playful for them, a bit more silly, and that's how you're going to see long-term results.
Yeah, that's great, Effie. Thank you so much. I'm moving on to the next question, which is something that we see like a bit of a common subject, and it's about food battles, which sometimes it leads to tantrums. And this is where we see that, each parent may deal with it in a different way. Some may lose temper a little bit quicker. Some might be a little bit of a different kind of a perspective in terms of like trying to calm the child down and understand what's going on. But food battles, it's something that I think is like, at the moment, the biggest query is something that we hear a lot, and parents need our help a lot about it. And especially like from a dietetic point of view, is when we're trying to get our kids to eat something healthy. So we start getting like some different techniques of hiding food, sauces, or like, in the pasta, or blending them all together. And this is where you see that when kids find them in the end of the day, they lose trust on us, and this is very difficult. So I'm always trying to say to parents to be honest with their kids, and this is helping, because at the end of the day, you want them to get familiar with this food. So hiding them, there's no really... But I understand the point of like getting as much nutrients they can, especially if a child is quite low in weight, and there is a little bit of concern there. So apart from that, you mentioned it before, Effie, we have other kind of like behaviors, either of like rewarding with food or pressuring a child to eat. And I really want your take on that, like given your clinical experience and your speciality, which is amazing. What do we do there? What is right? What is wrong? Where do we find the balance? I'm really interested to hear your opinion as well too.
Yeah, when we see those types of tricks that parents are trying to do to get their kid to eat more, to eat a bigger variety, or to eat more, it's always well-meaning. It's always because they are worried about their child, they're worried about the nutrients they're getting, or about their weight. It's always coming from a good place. What's important to think about in those moments is whether you want your kid to eat short term or whether you're trying to look at things more long term. Short term, sure, maybe you can hide a carrot in your tomato sauce and maybe they won't notice. Although if they're extremely picky, they probably will. And like you said, it'll impact your relationship with them because they might no longer trust you. And that might also raise their own anxiety every time they're going to have a meal.
Yeah.
Because they're not sure if mom or dad was hiding something in it.
Yeah.
Exactly. And we also know that anxiety suppresses appetite. So really what we're doing is actually pretty counterproductive, even though it is coming from a good place.
Yeah.
And I think in general, parents nowadays are trying to break cycles in general. When they realize that the way they were brought up wasn't necessarily the best way. Again, their parents were also doing their best. Their parents were also well-meaning. But we know a lot more now about psychology and behavior.
Thank you for mentioning that, Effie. Thank you.
And mental health in general.
Yeah.
So we know that pressuring and bribing and telling them one more bite and then you can go play, one more bite and then you can have dessert. Maybe they'll eat that one more bite, but is that one more bite really going to make a difference? Probably not. And research does show that it leads to more avoidance and a difficult relationship with you as well. It's something that creates a lot of stress for the parents, creates a lot of stress for the child, and it's super counterproductive at the end of the day. You're maybe short term they have that bite, but we want them to have at the end of the day a positive relationship with food when they're older and to be exposed, like you said. If we hide things, we're not exposing them, so they wouldn't be able to eat it in a different environment. And at the end of the day, that's what the goal is.
I have so many thoughts at the moment because you mentioned so many great things, and I'm thinking that we also did a bit of a webinar recently with a great psychologist, and we're talking about emotional eating, and we're saying how this rewarding with food can lead to emotional eating behaviors, especially when we're going to the teenage years and the adult years later on, and how food is linked to, you did something great, get something especially like a chocolate or a dessert. And you see, every time you have to cope with a difficult feeling, you're jumping to this as a mechanism of coping that. And it's not the best. But I really agree with you that generations are changing and research all the time is showing us so many new evidence that we can now utilize them and use them. And in the end of the day, our parents did the best as far as they knew.
Exactly.
And we as a generation, we as well. But this is where you see that you're saying therapy is so important, because you're starting to work with yourself, especially when you're becoming a parent, and you're saying, okay, I want to start working on 1, 2, 3, 4 things. And when you go to therapy, you're discovering a wide range of more things. And then you're saying, I don't want to pass them on my kid, because in the end of the day, all these are coming naturally without us thinking about it. So this one more bite that you were saying is all about what is the benefit of this one more bite? And in the end of the day, why I haven't now I'm starting to think a little bit loudly, Effie, but I haven't mentioned in the questions anything about the time of a meal. If you want, and if you are up to it, more than happy to discuss it as well. How long does a meal take to and why it shouldn't really be that long. But in the end of the day, you're seeing a child that is stressing a lot about this food. No, you have to stay here and finish your meal, but we hear it a lot. Why? There's no really benefit on that. And then it's all these negative experiences with food. Parents make it all the focus all day is about food. Have you eaten? No, you haven't eaten. Now you have to have this time of the day this snack, otherwise you haven't met your protein requirements. So it's something that we see a lot. Yeah. I'm really with you, and I do agree that you need to find a little bit of a balance in terms of these coping strategies and the techniques, because we want our kids to be happy and not to be in a difficult kind of place that they have to say that, okay, now I'm going to do the favor, I'm going to finish that, but then I'm going to feel awful about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're also trying to teach kids to listen to their own bodies, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So that they can have a good relationship with their bodies and with food when later on down the line.
Yeah.
So if we're telling them that they have to have one more bite, they have to have, they have to finish their plate.
Yeah.
Why?
Why?
You don't know how your child's stomach is feeling. They
We cannot finish our plates all the time.
And you shouldn't be finishing your plate if you're full. So why are we trying to pass that message across? It doesn't make sense.
Okay, Effie. Thank you so much. I mentioned here in the next question that I've recently made quite a funny video in terms of like me being a child and being picky and running because I was hyperactive and running all the time and trying a new food and then leaving. So I know it's something that it really is it's quite a common concern from parents, that we see that they don't really stay on the table, they don't eat their meal. And, jumping to that previous thought, the meal really takes long because they get one bite, they leave, or they might struggle to eat some and then they lose like their patience. Yeah. So give us a little bit of some tips on that, Effie, and some techniques on how can we make it a little bit more joyful for kids so they're happier.
I could talk about this all day.
Yeah. So start talking and I'm more than happy to hear.
Maybe the number one thing that we can look at is if our expectation of how long they're supposed to be sitting is realistic. So usually we're looking in general for sitting tolerance, whether that's for homework, whether that's for eating. We're looking at about 2 to 5 minutes per year of age. So let's say a 5-year-old, we would expect them to sit for 10 to 25 minutes.
All right.
And that's a 5-year-old who's neurotypical. If we're looking at a neurodivergent individual, we're looking at less. Yeah. So we kind of need to adjust our expectations here. So, okay, once we've kind of adjusted our expectations, another important aspect to consider is the ergonomic setup. So if our child is super uncomfortable, think about how twitchy you get when you're sitting in a really high chair, let's say, or in an uncomfortable position. You're kind of always shifting. You also want to kind of stand up. If your core is not supported, with your back is not supported, and your feet are dangling, you're not going to be comfortable. You're going to want to get up because you are not comfortable. So making sure that you have a high chair that you can adjust based on your child's age as they grow, or having a small table that they can sit at, and maybe you sit with them there because it's not going to be as uncomfortable for you to sit there as it would be for them to sit in a regular table maybe, and kind of shifting our perspective there and making sure that they're well supported so that they can actually sit and eat. So that's one area that's important to acknowledge, and I think it's overlooked a lot.
Oh, it's great. Because I'm thinking myself, I'm going somewhere and I cannot really find a place to put my feet, and they're like, in
so
the air. I'm like, okay, what are we doing here?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's not really something that's comfortable.
Exactly. And then getting some movement in before expecting them to sit is really important as well. And when I say movement, I don't mean go run around aimlessly. I mean more purposeful movement. So again, just 2-3 minutes. It doesn't have to be complicated. Maybe you do some animal walks. Maybe you do a little obstacle course, which maybe that's a bit more complex to set up. But it doesn't have to be super complicated. Maybe they have to jump to tap on their favorite Pokemon character. I don't know. It doesn't have to be very complicated.
Specific,
Or maybe they have to jump and give you some high fives 5 times. It doesn't have to be complex. I do have a free resource on my page about this that can give you a few more ideas.
That's great.
But a little bit of purposeful movement can really be helpful before expecting them to sit for a meal or homework or anything seated. So,
Sounds great, Effie. And I'm thinking all these like lovely things you're saying, and I'm having all these like different examples in my mind of different kids that I'm seeing. I'm saying, how helpful would that be? So definitely, when we will be closing this podcast, I will be adding our social media so they can find you and follow and see all these great things you are doing. But I think sometimes we're not really thinking that the way that we're sitting, the way that we're eating, all the like this environment that we are eating at the end of the day, it plays a role and is really important. So it's a lot about like mindful eating that I'm working a lot on that as well. And, for example, you did mention about kids that are neurodivergent, and in these cases, bright lights are quite distracting for them. A television on the background that is quite loud is very distracting for them. I don't know, mom cooking in the kitchen with a very like difficult smell for them. They're like, no. So it might be some like different reasons why they don't really want to sit in this table. But it's a great thing what you said about, giving them a little bit of a motivation before they eat, so they spend some energy, and then in the end of the day they can concentrate a little bit more on the meal. But it's a big thing that you're seeing parents are taking a big time for the kids to eat, like, if you're expecting for a 5-year-old to eat for an hour, it's not practical. They're not going to eat. They're going to eat, as you said, in the first minutes, play a little bit with their food, throw it away, or maybe anything like that, and then just leave.
Exactly.
Or just stay there, having to finish it, what we were saying before, and then struggling, and what's the point?
Yeah.
So this is where it becomes a little bit weird and difficult for kids.
I love that you added the other sensory components when it comes to sitting in an area and eating. So are the lights too bright? Are there background noises that are impacting their ability to feel comfortable? Are there strong smells? I really, really like all of those points that you mentioned. And even having, for extremely picky eaters, maybe some coffee beans that they can smell instead of having to smell if the other foods are really, really strong. Having something like that they can smell, or something comforting that they can smell, could be helpful as well. And then when it comes to building that sitting tolerance, it's important to maybe even use a visual timer. So for example, a sand timer or a time timer that's visual. So you can show them, maybe you set it up for, if they're getting up after every bite, maybe you set it up for a minute or two to begin. And then you slowly build up.
Definitely.
Yeah,
it's a starting point.
Exactly. And that visual helps them understand what the expectation is as well.
Wow.
And kind of helps them, you set them up for success in this way, because they can see, okay, I can do 30 more seconds. I don't have to get up right this instant. I can wait 30 seconds or a minute and then get up.
It's not something that's broad. It's very specific. So they have a target and they say, it's something that is easy to do. So
exactly.
Why not?
It breaks it down for them.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about ventures you're doing that you'd like to mention in the podcast so people can start following that or, getting more familiar? Is there anything you would like to mention?
Yeah. So follow me on Instagram. That's number one.
Putting that below.
And I will be releasing a sensory guide, which comes with a sensory quiz and over 100 sensory activities that you can do specific to your child's sensory preferences and sensory needs. And it comes with accommodation ideas as well. So if your child is sensitive to any kind of input, this is great for that reason as well. And later on, I hope to release some courses as well on sensory processing and on picky eating. So haven't been able to get onto those yet, but that is the future.
I'm sure you will get there. And in terms of like one-to-one sessions, Effie, can they also message you and see you in private if they need your help?
Yeah. So currently I am accepting new clients. Working one-on-one with parents is such a joy. I think it's so important to work with the parents themselves because they have the biggest impact. They're the ones with their children most of the time. Even if you do 1 or 2 hours a week of some sort of therapy, at the end of the day, it's the parents who spend the most time with them, and giving them the resources has the biggest impact.
Definitely, and it's all this like counseling you were saying for parents and like all this education for them. In the end of the day, very, very correctly, you mentioned that, Effie, it's the parents that are dealing with kids, and it's all about getting them to change as well.
Yeah.
The kind of mentality, the way they're doing things, understand their kids a little bit better and differently from our perspective and what we give them. And if you put a child to try something by themselves, it's not really like fair on them, isn't it? But if the whole family comes and sit together and they start trying and say, this food has this texture, has this kind of like taste, it gets an 5 out of 10, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's helpful for kids. So thank you for mentioning parents, because they do play a big role.
Huge
it's
role.
not only the kids, it's who is looking after them, and not only parents, grandparents, and carers.
Yeah.
That, many parents are working like for long hours and they have some help at home. So
Yeah.
I think it involves all of them.
Yes, educating whoever is involved is going to be the most powerful thing for sure.
Okay. Thank you so much for being here again.
Thank you,
I will be
Christina.
putting on social media below so people can get to know us a little bit better, start following us. Thank you for taking the time to watch us. Either you are seeing us on YouTube or listening to us on Spotify, and I hope you found it useful.